Hey, and welcome back to the Deliberate Exchange. This is Chelsea, and I'm so glad that you're here listening. I want to talk about how to rebuild a life because I've been thinking a lot about what happens after you do the hard thing. And I don't even know if quote unquote after is the right word, because I think we have this idea that we go through something difficult, we get through it, and then okay, now we're on the other side. But I don't know that there really is another side. I think you just start rebuilding. And I've been thinking about this a lot because of the conversations that I've been having with women lately, but also because I can see it so clearly in my own life. When I quit drinking 6.5 years ago, I thought that the hard part was going to be quitting drinking, which obviously was hard in its own ways. But I don't think I understood at the time that I wasn't just taking alcohol out of my life. I was going to have to learn how to do a whole bunch of things differently than I had been doing the same way for literally decades. And in the beginning, I don't think I really saw that because I had the pink cloud. And if you've quit drinking, you might know exactly what I'm talking about. But there's this period where you're like, holy shit, I feel fucking amazing. I'm sleeping, I'm waking up. I don't feel like shit. I'm proud of myself. I quit drinking. I'm doing this thing. And I didn't know if I could do it because I had tried and failed before. And there's a lot of momentum in that. There was definitely momentum for me. But eventually that wore off. Life becomes life again. And now you're not waking up every morning thinking like, holy shit, I didn't drink last night. You're just not drinking. And this is where it started getting really interesting because I started realizing how many of different parts of my life had involved alcohol without me necessarily thinking of them as being about alcohol. Like, how do I relax at the end of the day? How do I go out with people? How do I deal with being uncomfortable socially? How do I celebrate something? How do I date? How do I have sex sober? How do I deal with conflict when I know that there's not going to be a glass of wine later that lets me shut my brain off? These might sound like separate things, but they're really not. They're just life. I had to learn how to do my life again. And I remember that there was this realization at some point, oh, I'm actually a beginner here. I am a grown woman who is very capable in a lot of areas of my life. And somehow I'm a beginner at being a person in my own life. That's pretty fucking humbling because I knew how to do my old life. Even when it wasn't working as optimally as I wanted it, even when I was super unhappy and when some of the ways I was coping were making things worse, I knew how to be her. I knew what she did when she was stressed. I knew how she got through a hard week. I knew how she socialized. I knew how she made herself feel better. I knew how she handled uncomfortable feelings. Which is to say I didn't. But then I took away one of the biggest tools she'd been using to do all of that. So now what? And I don't think we talk about this part enough. We celebrate people when they make the big decision. You left the marriage, you quit drinking, you left the job, you set the boundary, you made it through an unimaginable loss. And obviously those things deserve to be celebrated. But then everyone sort of goes back to their lives. And you're standing there going okay, what the fuck do I do now? Because your life doesn't automatically reorganize itself around the person you're becoming. You have to do that. And that's where it can get really lonely. Once the pink cloud wore off for me, there was also just a lot there. It was this emotional backlog. all this emotional shit that I hadn't dealt with. Like I spent years pushing it down because I didn't know how to deal with it, and I didn't want to deal with it because I was afraid that it was going to just like unleash everything else. There was grief and anger. There were things from my marriage. There were things from losing my stepdad, things from caregiving, things about losing my job, and things that had happened long before any of those things. And I wasn't sitting there consciously thinking, I'm going to drink so I don't have to process my emotional backlog. Like, that's not how it works. Like, I wish I had that insight then. I only knew that alcohol could change how I feel. And once I didn't have that anymore, I actually had to learn what to do with how I felt. And for a while, I was doing the hard things. I was meditating sometimes, I was journaling, I found breath work very quickly after I quit drinking, and I was doing that, although not with the consistency that I eventually would and that I have today. And a lot of it was helping. But the real shift for me happened when those things stopped being something I reached for only when I wasn't okay. Like it stopped being something that was a tactical approach. And the shift came when it started becoming part of my everyday life. I started breathing regularly, meditating regularly, journaling, and then I went much deeper into deep therapeutic work with breath work and really started looking at myself. Of course, not in a what's wrong with me kind of way. It was more like, why do I do that? Why does that particular thing get such a massive reaction out of me? Why do I need somebody to think that I'm strong, like physically strong? Why is it so uncomfortable for me to ask for help? Why do I feel responsible for how everybody else in the room feels? Why can I tell somebody else to rest and then have such a hard time giving myself permission to do it? And that's where I kind of started realizing that quitting drinking really just opened the door. I talk a lot about how quitting drinking was a fire starter, and then everything else that came down or came after was kind of like an accelerant. Because I could stop drinking and still have all the same patterns. I could be sober and still abandon myself and still overfunction. I could still be sober and still look outside of myself for validation. I could be sober and still have no idea what to do with anger or grief or anxiety. And that is an important distinction. Removing the coping mechanism isn't the same thing as healing what made you reach for it. And I don't mean that everybody has some giant trauma buried underneath everything they do. Like, not what I'm saying at all. I mean that we all have ways we've learned to get through life. And when you decide one of those ways doesn't work for you, there's going to be a learning curve while you figure out another way to go through it. And I tell the women in my community calls on Wednesdays, we have often spent years, right? Like I had mentioned decades, but we often spend years learning to cope in a certain way. And then we quit drinking or we quit the coping mechanism, and now we have to learn, and we get frustrated with ourselves that we're not further enough along, we're not getting it, and we're still kind of like devolving into the same old patterns. But it takes time. That's the rebuilding. And the rebuilding is not very glamorous. It's not this like beautiful montage where you're journaling in the sunlight and doing breath work and suddenly you're healed. And sometimes it's realizing halfway through an argument, like, fuck, I'm doing that thing again. Or you don't realize it until the next morning or for another 6 months. Or sometimes you set a boundary and then immediately want to take it back because somebody's upset with you. Or you go somewhere and you feel awkward as fuck because everybody's drinking and you don't know what the fuck to do with your hands. And sometimes you realize that you don't actually like something that you've been doing for 20 years or even people. You realize that you don't like the people that you've been hanging out with or the way a relationship works. And now you have to deal with that. And that's what I mean when I say you're rebuilding a life. It's so much bigger than the original thing. And this applies whether the hard thing was drinking or going through a divorce, going through the grieving process, changing your career, being a caregiver, which I don't think is getting a lot of kind of attention, or really whatever your thing was. There's the part where you survive it, and then there's this whole other part where you have to figure out who you are now, that you're not just surviving it anymore. And I've been thinking about this with the women who come to my Wednesday calls. A lot of these women have already done incredibly hard things. And what they don't need is another person telling them how strong they are. They know they're strong for the most part. They still need some reminders, but for the most part, they know that they're strong. They've had to be. There's something else they're looking for. It's like, okay, I did the thing. Now, how do I build a life here? How do I have fun now? How do I make friends as this version of myself? How do I trust myself? How do I stop feeling like I'm waiting for something bad to happen? How do I let someone help me without it making me feel so weak? How do I have a weekend that actually feels good instead of filling every single second of it because I don't know how to be still? And there's something incredibly comforting about being around other people who are figuring that out too. And that is where you realize, like, oh, I'm not behind. I'm learning. And I really wish that somebody would have explained that to me earlier. That you're allowed to be bad at your new life for a while. You're allowed to be clunky, and trust me, it will be clunky. You're allowed to try something and realize that it's not it either. You're allowed to miss parts of your old life without wanting your old life back. That's a big one. You can still miss parts of your old life without wanting the whole thing back. We can get scared when we miss something. Like somehow missing it means that we've made the wrong choice. I can miss things about drinking and still know without a shadow of a doubt that I don't want to drink. Those things can exist at the same time. I can miss an old version of myself and not want to be her anymore. That's part of the grief that accompanies these big changes in our lives. And rebuilding involves way more grief than we give it credit for. You're not just grieving what happened to you. Sometimes you're grieving the person you had to become to survive it. Or you're grieving relationships that don't fit anymore. Maybe even sometimes like you're grieving how easy it was to just not think about certain things. Or you're grieving the fantasy that once you did this one big hard thing, everything else was going to fall into place. It doesn't. And I actually don't believe that that's bad news anymore. Because what has happened instead, at least for me, is that I've slowly built a relationship with myself that I didn't have before. And I mean slowly. 6.5 years later, I'm still learning things about myself. I'm still catching patterns. I'm still having moments where I go like, okay, that's what that was. I'm still learning how to let people help me. Like I remember I had a fraud incident several months ago, and I was feeling quite vulnerable and quite upset about it. And Kevin was working, so like he wasn't available because he was working. And so I messaged Christina and I said, like, I'm just messaging you to say I'm feeling really vulnerable and sad right now. And I think I would have to go read the text, but I think I literally said, like, I'm learning to not just exist in this vacuum and reaching out to tell you as a means of support. or starting that. I'm still learning where my actual capacity is instead of what I can technically force myself to do, which like is a lot. Like I have proven in so many different instances in my life that I can force myself and push and push and push until basically life's no fun. And I think that that's a lyric of a song. If you know what song I kind of just spoke the lyric to, could you write a comment or send me a message? I'm also still learning what it means to trust myself. And I'm relatively certain that I'm not going to arrive at some point where I'm like, okay, I'm excellent. I'm finished. I'm fully healed. I got this. Like, thank you. We're good. And I don't even want that anymore. Because the practices I started doing because I was trying to get through something became a part of how I live. I don't meditate because I'm broken and need to fix myself. I don't do breath work because I need to calm myself down all the time. I certainly don't journal every day because like there's some giant thing I need to work through. I do those things because they help me stay in relationship with myself. They help me notice. They help me come back. And that's probably the biggest difference between the life I was living then and the one that I'm living now. I know how to come back to myself. Like I know the way back. And that is part of what rebuilding really is. It's not building this perfect new life where nothing hard happens and you never fall into an old pattern again. It's knowing that when life changes, and it fucking will, you've heard me say this before if you've been listening for, if you've been in my world, that life is going to life. You're going to have good people die, bad things are going to happen, and you're going to have to learn to get through all of those things. You will have a relationship with yourself that you can come home to in the midst of all those storms. And then you can take that and you can keep applying it to the next thing that comes up. You can learn again, you can change again, you can rebuild again. And so if you have done the hard thing and you're looking around going like, why don't I feel better yet? Or why is this still so fucking hard? Probably nothing has gone wrong. You're just in the messy middle that everybody would prefer to kind of gloss over because it sucks. You're learning how to live here. And that takes time. And wherever you are at in your journey, whatever you are walking through, please know that I see you in that. I'm sending you a lot of love and compassion. If this episode has resonated, if it made you think, please forward it to somebody or like, comment, subscribe. I'd be so grateful. And in the meantime, breathe it in, be deliberate, and please be good to yourself.